Okay, recording.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to Future Work Scotland. Thrilled to be doing this. Another great session for you. We did one last week, so we're back in quick succession. Just the usual sort of formalities. We've got a very simple code of conduct. We simply ask that you be respectful for one another. We want everyone to have a great time. And if this is your first time with us, very warm welcome to you. Those of you who've been with us before, we joked before, the eagle-eyed amongst you might recognise I'm not in my usual place. I'm on the move today. That shouldn't deter from a great session. Krista's session is going to be interactive, so you'll have some natural points where he feels he'll be able to stop to take some questions. So yeah, we'll facilitate you through those as per usual. We will use the chat, so drop them in, but there should be plenty of time to ask questions, and we'll do our usual community shout out at the end. There's quite a lot of stuff to be talking about at the moment because we're kind of in a sort of conference season. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome our good friend Chris Stone to Future Work Scotland. I was lucky enough to hang with Chris just a few weeks ago when the two of us were both at Lean Agile London speakers. So it was a fantastic event and we had a great time. Know Chris for a wee while now. First really met him when we were doing the Agile 20 Festival. He supported me with some of the work we did with some of the patrons. Most folk know him as the virtual sort of Agile coach, and he's done great work in the community. He's sharing a lot of fantastic content all the time. Yeah, a lot of us really like what he does. He's very well known for a lot of the work he does in the retrospective space, which is certainly part of what we'll be covering tonight. And he's also partway through writing a book, which is very exciting, but he doesn't really talk about that. So see whether he mentions that or not. But yeah, without further ado, delighted to welcome Chris as our guest speaker for our June session. Chris, over to you.
All right, folks. Thank you for the introduction, Sath. Yes, it was great to hang with you a few weeks ago at Lean Agile London. And as Sath mentions, I'm not the sort of person that likes to just talk at people. So with that in mind, jump into the Zoom link and you will see Donald has kindly shared a link to a mirror board, which we'll be using to interact as part of the session today. As he also mentioned, I'm a bit of a fan of retrospectives. And if you've been on that little known platform called LinkedIn, you may have seen some of the stuff I share. You will, if you find your way on the mirror boards, land somewhere about here. And what I'm going to do as well is I'm going to share my screen for anyone who is, for any reason, unable to access the mirror board. So give me a moment to launch that off. Yes, so I don't like spending too much time talking about myself. Suffice to say, I'm a big fan of continuous improvement, and I believe the key to agility is continuous improvement, and the key to continuous improvement is retrospectives. And the problem I believe with retrospectives is that a lot of the time, the learning you gain from them remains locally to the team. And that learning it's one of the most powerful resources we have to us in companies to bring about continuous improvement. We don't tend to harness it and leverage it just enough. I'm also a believer in having fun in the workplace, and you'll probably see some elements of that in how I deliver this session today and in some of the templates and methods that I use to bring about change and identify change and hopefully resolve change as well, resolve impediments as well, sorry. So with that in mind, let's kick off with a bit of an ice melter. And this isn't one of those icebreakers for the sake of icebreakers. It's one that has a bit of intent. So what I'd like you to do is grab one of these Post-it notes on the left-hand side here. You should be here. In that Post-it note, you will put your name and your role. What you're then going to do is drag it somewhere over here. And then you're going to draw a line between your Post-it notes and someone else's to represent certain traits. So it will be a green line if you have learned something from this person. It will be a blue line if it's someone you've perhaps collaborated with in some capacity. And it'll be a red line if it's someone you want to network with in the future. The way you can draw these lines, if you press P on your keyboard, it will enable you to use the pen functionality. And also down the left-hand side, you can select the colors as well to ensure you've got the right color selected. So with that in mind, I am going to do this as well. I'm going to create one, Chris Stone, the virtual Agile coach. That's me. And I need a green line for Mr. Coburn, and also a blue line, because he and I have done a podcast together, which came up today, for anyone who's interested. Who else have we got here? Other names. I've definitely would like to collaborate in some capacity with Magda, so I need a red line for her. And you folks keep doing this as we're doing as well. What we're going to start to see, it's going to be a bit chaotic, and I love that. It's a bit chaotic. We're going to start to see the power of networks, the power of different groups of people. So let's see how this plays out. Just a reminder for anyone who needs to know, P on your keyboard enables you to access the different pen functionalities to enable you to draw these lines. What I'm going to do is I want to create one for Sath as well, because I think he should be on here. Just because I know you can't do this from your car, Sath. And I've definitely collaborated with you, so you're on that too. All right, what do we observe? Things are happening. Feel free to share your thoughts out loud, folks. What's happening here? Any connections we're seeing? There's lots of blue lines, lots of collaboration lines. There's a few red lines appearing. So relationships people perhaps want to strengthen with one another. This is a great exercise to do as perhaps as part of a community of practice or like a town hall style event to emphasize where our networks lie. And perhaps if there's a single person or certain people that lots of people learn from, those are probably your community champions, the people that share lots of things. And it's a great way to recognize those people as well. It can also be a great way of saying, oh, who haven't I worked with in the past? And again, making a plan to network or collaborate with someone that you haven't worked with. All right, good stuff. Okay, so in this session today, we are going to be exploring continuous improvements at scale, which is beyond just retrospectives, beyond just those local retrospectives. And where I'd like to begin is a little scenario. I'm going to paint a picture for you. You have two agile teams in software delivery. They're at the same company. They're both a similar size and they have similar skill sets. Both of them are working on AI related features because, as we all know, AI is so hot right now. And they are building AI related components for the same product. So there's a lot of similarities between these teams. They have both experienced a challenge, the same challenge with how they tokenize the third-party API they're using. Now, Team Thor, they hit that problem back in February, and they found a solution after a few weeks of challenge, whereas Team Hulk faced the same challenge in May, months after. Why do we think this happened? Feel free to share your thoughts aloud. Any thoughts as to why a team faced the same problem that another team faced months after it happened?
Because they were not sharing that information across. Because what happens in a retro stays in a retro.
Yes, okay, so a couple of good reasons there. Any other thoughts?
Along the same lines, I'm going to say no centralized communication pathways. Basically, no good communication within teams.
Good stuff, thank you. Any other builds on that?
Working in the same thing.
Sorry?
They might not know they're working in the same thing or trying to solve the same problem.
Yeah, well, it's not necessarily the same problem. They might be working on different components within the same product, but both looking to leverage AI, because every company's gone, oh, AI is going to be so powerful. And there's thousands of new AI products coming all the time. It might just be the speed of change that they're not aware, but it's the point you've raised is that there's a lack of awareness as to what other teams are working on. All right, so I've added a few examples here as to why I think this happens. Well, the Vegas rules. I think, was it Magda, you shared this? So many teams, they do their retrospectives and the rules tend to be, hey, what stays in Vegas or happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. In an effort to retain psychological safety, we don't share our learnings outside of the team for fear of repercussions, for fear of any damage to the team, and to maintain psychological safety. it could just be that, hey, we're too busy. We're constantly churning after the next feature, the next thing on the backlog. So therefore, we don't take the time to prepare knowledge shares to let other teams know what we're working on. Indeed, there may not even be the connection lines between those other teams or the cadence that enables you to share with other teams. And also, just fundamentally, knowledge sharing doesn't tend to be incentivized. How many teams have any sort of OKRs or objectives that relates to sharing their learnings around the company? I find it happens seldom. So again, we're trying to emphasize the importance of learning at scale and continually improving at scale. And here again, I'd love to know your thoughts. Where do you sit on this duality line? On the left-hand side, and the statement, by the way, is scaling continuous improvement is easy. Moving these little post-it notes to share your individual perspective, where do you sit? Do you not even know where to start on the left-hand side versus it's a piece of cake on the right, or are you on the fence somewhere in the middle? Drag one of these little post-it dudes accordingly on that scale to represent your individual perspective. Okay, so there's a mixture of responses, most people towards the center here. Nobody has said they believe it's just a piece of cake. So what about your thoughts on continuous improvement? What does continuous improvement at scale mean to you? Type a few words in these post-its to represent your perspective. If you were to describe continuous improvement in a few words, what would they be? And again, if you prefer to interact by speaking aloud, if you prefer to talk on the Zoom chat, Shand, for example, if you can't access the mirror board, feel free to share your contributions however you are capable. All right, so we've got some thoughts around systems thinking, improvement at various levels, sharing across communities, systemic issues, yeah, learning across teams, so scaling learning as business as usual, surfacing the constraints, yeah, the impediments to progress. Management improves, not just squads, interesting. CI as everyone's role, I love that. Continuous improvement is a team sport, it's not any one person's role. It's a culture, it's self-awareness. All right, some lots of really good thoughts on continuous improvement. I'm just going to check the chat quickly. Shan, thank you. Sharing knowledge gained from experience within a team across the org. Okay, good stuff. Now let's explore some ways that you can firstly identify some of these systemic impediments. And for everyone's awareness, what I mean when I say systemic impediments, I tend to mean things that hold back multiple teams, not just a single team. The sorts of things that are systemic across maybe a team of teams, a release train, maybe even a department, or even the entire company. And one such technique I love using is called the pain avalanche. This was inspired by Lisa Radkin shared a technique called the pain snake, where you would have post-its on a wall in the shape of a snake, and someone would just, when they were suffering pain, something that was holding them back, they would add to that post-it note what the pain was and what it caused them, or what the impact was on their work, on their ability to achieve things. And they would add it to the tail of the snake, so it would just keep getting longer. And at any point in time, you could periodically look at that snake and start to look at some of the trends. And maybe say, hey, multiple people are suffering this. This sounds like a systemic thing. Now, the pain avalanche was born of this. And the story is, I was facilitating a town hall event with hundreds of people. It was a scaled agile environment with people across the world. And I was facilitating the town hall. Now, being me, I turned up in full skiing gear because I decided to do a snow day themed town hall. So I had my goggles on and I've got a one ski, which is a full on salopettes plus top combined. So I was wearing the full outfit and I had this mountain theme. And I said, all right, your pain avalanche is all of the things that hold you back on a day-to-day basis or stop you delivering value. And that is represented by all of these white post-it notes cascading down the side of this mountain. So we're going to practice this exercise very quickly. And I would like you to, on these post-it notes, share just some of the common impediments you have noticed that affect multiple teams in the workplace from your experience. So take a moment to add on those post-it notes, and you should be Just going to drag your attention here on the whiteboard now. Share your pains. This could be the one thing stopping you from achieving your top priority, and the biggest thing holding you back. What I tend to encourage as well is to include the impact it has on you and your team at the end of that post-it. I know there are many, but just try and add just that one good example from your perspective. Okay, so I'm seeing spaghettis of dependencies. Changing priorities, a very common one. Multiple number one priorities, I guess. Yeah, so too many conflicting priorities. It's a common one. Bureaucracy. Leadership conflicts. Again, dependencies. No one knows who the decision makers are. Funding constraints. Okay, so lots of impediments that might affect multiple teams. So how to use this exercise? As I said, I tend to use it as part of a town hall or maybe a scaled retro. Typically, a scaled retro might be quarterly, perhaps an inspect and adapt event if you're running in scaled agile, or just any situation where you can get multiple teams together to represent how things are going and just retrospect. And you just capture all of these potential impediments. You could then start to categorize this data, perhaps using affinity mapping, and we'll get to affinity mapping and use an example of that a bit later. But the trends tend to be the systemic impediments. They're affecting a lot of people. So that's one demonstration very quickly. We are going to use this particular data set we've just created in a few exercises as we go through this. So pause on that for a moment. Has anyone ever played impediment bingo before? Should be here now. I'm guessing silence means no. Good, because I created it. There is many forms of bingo. I've seen Scrum bingo. I decided to go, well, impediment bingo, why not? And again, you can use it by creating a bingo style board, a bit like this, surfacing a bunch of impediments, perhaps through the pain avalanche. You could capture the impediments through an anonymous survey or otherwise. And then all you do is put a board like this and you get individuals to share using these little bingo balls if that is something, that particular impediment is something their team suffers from. There's a few ways you can do this. For example, if you've got multiple teams, and I've got the team icons down here, I commonly use these team icons as examples. We've got Team Thor, Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America, Iron Man, and Thanos. And I can see someone's put a female character down there. Thank you for that. Should have done that myself. So we've got Wonder Woman, even though that Wonder Woman is from Justice League, and that is an abomination to include that alongside Marvel, I'll let it slide. It's okay. So we've got these team icons. And you get your impediments. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to practice it. So we're going to select some of those impediments we've just made, and we're going to bring them across to this bingo board, and we'll make it real. So give me a moment. They're starting to appear. So let's just move them around quickly. So top left is leadership. Feel free to help me move them around. There we go. Good work. Good teamwork, gang. Fear on the right. Indecision. Look at that. Perfect. We've got, although there's some duplicates, you should be able to see how this works. Okay. I think we just lost one. Let me get that back. There we go. All right. So now we've got 16 impediments. Did have 16 impediments. Anyway, we've got 16 impediments in these on this grid. And what you do is you invite the team at the team level to move their icons onto the ones that they face. And what that will highlight is if, for example, you had this impediment on the right, priorities constantly changing, and several teams shared it, that they experienced it, that is something that is likely to affect multiple teams and therefore probably needs some attention. So what I'd like you to do now, we're not doing this at the team level now. What we're going to do is we're going to do this at the individual level. And what I'd like you to do is use these little bingo balls and drag those onto any of those impediments that you personally have faced. Obviously, you've added your own ones, but let me just move them to the front quickly. All right, too late, don't worry, just let it happen. They are sliding behind those post-it notes, but that's okay. What we should start to see is the one that affects the most of this audience. And again, this is helping us narrow in to the one that's causing us harm. Now, another point to note is, let's say you've got a team that's scoring bingo, like hitting all of the impediments. It's probably something that needs a bit of extra leadership support. So that team might be particularly in need of help. And this is a good beacon to leadership to say, hey, this team needs help, folks. All of these impediments are causing this team some harm. So just a couple of ways there of visualizing and identifying systemic impediments. Here's another one. Anyone familiar with a team health check? This is probably a pretty common one. Just while you're thinking on that, I see there's a comment from Shand. Would you use the bingo board on its own or in conjunction with the previous board? So you can use many methods, Shand, to surface your systemic impediments. One of them could be the pain avalanche. Another could be, for example, this team health check at scale. There are lots of ways of doing that. And all you're doing is you're putting 16 or however many squares you want onto the bingo board and doing that as a mass exercise to see how many teams are affected by it. Typically, I prefer to do that live in front of everyone so everyone sees the power of it, sees the scale of the problem. This board for awareness will persist. So the board can be viewed at any time after the session if you need to recap.
Any questions in the chat, Chris?
Yes, I was just responding to those as we were going along. So I've just responded to those. Now, a team health check, not only are they useful to help a team with their own improvement, but they can also be scaled. For anyone unfamiliar, the example I'm showing here, and I'll just zoom in a little bit further. We are here on the board now. This is an updated version of the Spotify health check, originally shared by Henrik Nyberg and updated by Martin Esterberg. And it looks into a number of facets of the team. So delivering value, easy to release, fun, health of code base, speed, stress, communication, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what you'll do is you will select the sections that are relevant to you and your context. You might not choose to use all 16 of these. It might be you simplify it and just use 5, whatever fits your situation. Now, to make this work at scale, you need to use a common 5 across the whole company. So find the ones that fit. On an individual basis, you then get each team to perform the health check. And what they do is anonymously, they will rate whether one of these sections is red, amber, or green from their perspective. They will also give a trajectory. Is it getting better, pointing upwards? Is it staying the same sideways, or is it getting worse? So it's a really simple method of scoring things. And what I love about these health checks is that they are the individual team's perspective, not some external maturity assessment. They give you a snapshot in time view as to how the team thinks things are going in relation to those particular facets of their team. And it gives you a bit of a baseline on what you can improve upon. As you can see in this example, you've got January in the left-hand column. If you were to narrow in on the areas of focus for that team in January, it would be easy to release and inclusivity. And that's what that team did. They identified some opportunities to improve based on those areas. And then when you perform this again 3 months later, because quarterly works quite well for this, you're looking to see, have we improved in relation to that? Has things changed? Are they getting better now? And if we start to see those reds turning to ambers or those ambers turning to greens, if we start seeing those downwards arrows starting to point upwards, we're starting to see improvement. Now, that's what you can find, or you can use to help an individual team. But then if you scale this across 13 teams or however many teams you have, you begin to see some of the systemic things. So again, zooming in a little bit, or bringing you over to here. This was a January 2023 version of the health check with several teams in parallel. And you can start to see some trends. So you can start to see, hey, 3 of the 6 teams are affected by stress, or they believe that it's stress for them. Stress is a red area. And proactivity is also an area of focus. So you can start to see trends where perhaps the areas that are red are your areas of focus, where things are starting to go downwards. Again, these are your systemic things. You can even make this numerical. You could do a count of all of the greens versus ambers versus reds, all of the arrows and how they are, and just do a count. And then next time you do it, you might say, well, we've reduced that by 15%. And that can be quite a powerful story because it's numerical and, management loves numbers. Again, very important to note that this method, this tool is not to be used as a comparison between teams. We're not saying, hey, this team rated themselves as a red and therefore they are worse than this team who rated themselves as green. That's not what it's about. It's simply a option in your arsenal to gauge where things are. It allows people to share their consensus or their view, not an external consultant's view. And it can be a great way to spot trends across teams of teams from which you would then look to try and bring about change. Now, it's great to highlight to leadership, hey, look at these areas that are in need of focus. What are you going to do about this? How will you help your teams, acting as servant leaders to your teams, to turn some of those reds into ambers or turn some of those ambers into greens? And just to note, you can also use the same practice as a community health check, or you could do it as, for each community of practice, do a health check, choose some areas that make sense to them. I've got a template for that as well that I can share. Any questions on that before we move forward? Doesn't this take away the anonymous ability in the previous one though? What do you mean there, Shand?
So in the previous one, sorry, my voice is gone, so I can't really speak. In the previous one, you said that, enable anonymous voting. So that is still broken down by teams, I suppose, yes. But I think in this one, you are zooming in on the team itself. So would there be any repercussions for that based on this view of it? I mean, I like the view. It's fantastic that you can see it at a system level. But I'm just wondering if like you said, there would be any problems for the teams out of this kind of view.
So specifically to the health check itself, it's still anonymous. So all you're doing is you're exposing that this team believed this. This was their rating. They haven't said specifically which member of the team shared that rating. It's just the team's perspective.
Right. Okay. I'm just wondering if how management tends to do these things. So I'm just wondering if management are going to say this team is bad compared to that team, and if that's going to be a problem.
That's why I have the caveat at the bottom. This is not for comparison between teams. It's an approach where you can gain a snapshot in time view as to the health of the teams, and its intent is to shine a light on where the teams need help, not where they are not good enough. It's not a measure of success. This is, hey, where are they struggling right now? Where do they need support? If you caveat that when you introduce it, then it should be okay. I've not faced any challenges with that personally.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's another of my creations, the 8 wastes of software engineering retrospective. Obviously, this one's specific to software teams. And bringing your attention to here on the board, what you can see is the 8 wastes of software engineering as described by Mary and Tom Poppendick. So that was the inspiration for this retro. You have task switching, partially done work, unused talent, defects, handoffs, extra processing, delays, and extra features. What you would do is, again, as part of a town hall or a scaled retrospective with lots and lots of teams present, you would allow them to read what each of these sections mean. And it's probably a good idea to share what each of these mean ahead of time. So it's a bit of a pre-read. And then what you're doing is you're offering the teams the ability to share which of those they most face. Okay, so you would drag some of these little waste icons onto the ones they face. And again, the ones, the wastes with the most dot votes, again, are likely to be your systemic impediments. I tend to try and narrow down to a maximum of 3 from the 8, and then design an experiment accordingly that looks to address those wastes. So I've got a specific retrospective that looks to focus on that. So once you've narrowed down to your 3, and let's say hypothetically, in fact, what we'll do now is we'll just practice it. You folks take a look at those wastes and rate the ones that you believe you are most impacted by in your workplace right now. Drag and drop the little red trash can icons onto those wastes that you believe affect you. So task switching is a very common one. That comes down to that prioritization thing we had earlier. Too many conflicting priorities. So 3, 2, 1, pause. Okay, our most based on this very, very snapshot view, our top 3 wastes are task switching, delays, and handoffs, right? What we would then do is we would go into this retro board where we'd narrow in on those 3. So we've got task switching, we've got delays, and handoffs. And then we have some prompts. Where are we struggling with context switching? What would enable us to better focus as a team? So we start to use a prompt to crowdsource ideas as to how we can address that. Same with delays. Where are we specifically being held up by things outside of control, and how could we shorten feedback loops with those we work with? Again, we're just trying to generate insights. Those insights will then result in actions that you try to use to address that particular problem. Any questions on that one before we move on to some examples of how we can categorize some of this data we're starting to capture?
Chris, I've got a question.
Go for it.
How readily do you find your audience relating to these wastes?
How readily do I
Yeah,
find
how
my
easily,
audience
how
relates to
readily
them?
do they relate to these wastes? Do they recognize them?
I find many of them are particularly recognized. Some obviously less than others. If you are working in a non-software team, defect is probably going to be less relevant to them. But many of these are pretty common, I find, particularly in the software world.
Thank you.
To which extent, again, is the difference between companies. So where some teams may think, or some companies might find task switching as their biggest issue, others might find, well, unused talent, we're not best utilizing our people. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples of how we can categorize and sort that data. So we've captured a bunch of things, bringing your attention to here on the board now. Hopefully, well, you may be familiar with this visual. It's the spheres of control or influence. I think I know Corey calls it something about the soup. Yeah, everything outside of the circle is in the soup, and the things that are in your control are things that your team has the ability to do something about without having to go to someone else. The things that are in our influence are maybe where we have dependencies, or we might be able to go to another team and say, hey, can you help here? And the things outside, the things that are everything else, are things we have no control over. And very commonly, I find lots of the time, people or teams will say, hey, we're stuck with this, escalate, escalate, escalate. Okay. Anyone experience that? Might just be me. That's all right. Many times I have observed a situation where an impediment is coming up over and over, and the team just simply believes it's something that's outside of their control. What we'll do, we've escalated it a bunch of times, we can't get past it. Yeah, and they do that. Now, this is an approach you can use, and I find it quite useful. Again, at scale, find an impediment, perhaps one of these ones that we've captured as part of the pain avalanche, or I've got one in the top left-hand corner. Our legacy system and tech debt make it difficult to make change at pace. That's an example of an impediment. And I share that impediment. I make sure everyone knows that's the one we're thinking about. And what I do is I get people to move an X into, from their perspective, where it sits. And yeah, the area that has the most X's, again, is a bit of information. It tells you what people believe about that particular thing. Now, if there is lots of things that are in the everything else section, a great question from leadership back to the teams is, hey, what steps could we take that might help you move this toward the center of the circle? So this starts to open into what could we do to improve autonomy? Okay. So I have observed a lot of times it's this escalate, escalate, escalate thing. This can be quite a useful exercise just to visualize a particular impediment that's affecting multiple teams. You've probably previously identified this using one of the previous examples, and it's just a good sense check. Where does this actually sit? Now, if many people believe it's genuinely out of their control, I've got another technique you can try. We're going to bounce towards that quickly, and it's called the marginal gains gauntlet. Again, another creation of mine. Is anyone familiar with the story of marginal gains by Team Sky and David Brailsford? I see David's got his hand up. Good stuff. For anyone unfamiliar, David Brailsford came to Team Sky in the mid 2000s. At the time, Team Sky on this cycling stage, and indeed Britain on the cycling stage, were not particularly successful. They'd never won the Tour de France. They were not a known quantity in the cycling world. Now, what David Brailsford did is he came in as the sporting director, and rather than trying to fundamentally shift, make these large changes that you'll probably recognize lots of companies try to do, make big changes, he said, right, let's just focus on these marginal gains, these 1% improvements. If anyone's read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, there's a great visual here about the aggregation of small changes over time. If you were to begin January 2023 by making a 1% improvement every day, by the end of the year, you'd be 37 times better than where you started. Whereas you'd be in a much worse place if you got 1% worse every day. So I call this running the marginal gains gauntlet. Again, take your impediments and let's practice it, shall we? Let's grab one of these impediments that we had from earlier. I'll grab one from the bingo section. Let's see how it runs. Where's my bingo board gone then? There you go. I'll grab too many priorities because that was a good one. The intent of this exercise is to try and find small changes that are in the sphere of control of the team. So too many priorities. That's our impediment. And what we're going to do is we're going to run this gauntlet of several questions that will hopefully help us identify some small things we can do relating to that issue. We may believe it's out of our control, but if you focus on the 1% changes, odds are you can find something that is in your control. So let's start with that. And we need to do this as a team now, folks. I need your help. First question is, which parts of our process, try and think of real life, which parts of our process feel redundant or are unnecessarily complex? Because identifying and simplifying complex or redundant parts of processes can lead to significant marginal gains. Feel free to type on these post-it notes or talk aloud. Let's try and answer that question in relation to the impediment, too many priorities. See someone's responding in the chat. That's Donald sharing a good link for the Agile Alliance Scotland Hub. What feels like a complex or redundant process relating to there being too many priorities?
Chris, it's Nicola. I have a question.
Yes.
So are we
Yes.
just making up the process?
No, so the process is basically starting with impediment at the bottom. You at the beginning of this cycle route, and you as a group, this could be lots and lots of people in parallel or a small group, depending on your situation. You are looking to work from that impediment by answering these questions, and by the end, you might have identified some things you can do about that impediment that moves it from outside of our control to inside our control, and therefore you're making a small marginal gain rather than saying, oh, we can't do anything and nothing changing.
All right. Okay. So the things down the left side are corresponding to the post-it notes.
Yes, that's right. Sorry,
Okay,
I should have made that
got
clear.
it.
So
Okay,
on this
no,
first post-it note here, the beginning of the gauntlets, we're looking to answer this first question. Which parts of our process feels redundant or unnecessarily complex? Then we go into, hey, what's one small change we can make that would save each team member a few minutes every day? All right, so we could look at, first off, we could look at the intake process and how it's assessed. So commonly companies have some sort of funnel, a mechanism for new stuff to make it onto a backlog. We might start by looking to simplify that. Maybe it's the form that's taking a bit longer than it usually did. Maybe it's a really long business case to even get something into the process. Maybe we start by simplifying that, making a minimum viable form to get something in. Maybe it's to do with the amount of time we spend reviewing that process. Maybe it's the number of approvals it has to go to before it goes from one stage to another. Lots of things there. What about the next one? What's one small change we can make to save each team member a few minutes each day relating to too many priorities? Okay. Clarity on definition. So everyone's talking from the same hymn sheet. We might have something as part of a daily sync, which addresses the conflicting priorities coming in and allows us just to focus on the things that are important. So we're not wasting time starting on too many things. We might route new demands, those taps on people's shoulders saying, hey, can you just do this, through the product owner, so they authorize, so they act as that shield to the team. Probably lots of things you can do there. Anyway, I'm not going to exhaust this too heavily. It's just an option you have to run the gauntlet. Let's start with an impediment, go through this list of questions as a team or an organization and begin to identify options. That's one way to resolve it. There are many matrices such as this, effort versus value. You might have an issue where you've got lots of systemic impediments and you're just trying to narrow down to a few. I like to call this one, or I like to focus on the lightning McWins, so the short, sharp wins, the quick wins, or the marginal gains ones. So the things that are going to be low value, low efforts, or high value, low efforts. So you'd basically just grab some of those impediments, you'd map them on this matrix here, and use that to identify where you should head next. The things that are in these left-hand sections here, I recommend is where you create or design experiments around to address the impediments. So again, you might have used some of the previous examples, the impediment bingo, the pain avalanche, the 8 wastes. Some of those might have exposed some of these systemic impediments, and you might have used this to start prioritizing them if there aren't many that are conflicting. Any questions or thoughts there? All right, conscious of time, we're going to do something around affinity mapping. Now, first, I'm going to quickly demonstrate what I've just learned about, which is Miro AI. Has anyone used Miro AI yet? No? All right. Let's show you how it works. I'm going to grab those pain avalanche identified impediments onto our board. I'm going to color them slightly differently just so you can visualize them a bit better. Let's make them pink. Should be here on the board now. So you can see these are the ones we identified. I'm just going to remove the ones that are empty. Okay. What you should see is what looks like 12 or 15 impediments. If I now press this magic mirror button, I've got 3 options. One is summarize. So I press that, and what it's going to do is going to create a post-it note summarizing that particular list of items. So it says challenges include uncertainty, fear, change in priorities, bureaucracy, leadership conflict, dependencies between teams causing stagnation. One quick way of looking at data or doing what my brain cannot do as quickly as Miro AI can do. You also have cluster by keyword. I'm going to do the same thing, and it's going to do something else. So this time I'm pressing the mirror button, and I'm going to press cluster by keywords. Again, it's going to do some witchcraft. Voila. Now we have them clustered very quickly, even a short, sharp affinity map. Some around decision-making. It's actually quite good. Decision-making, silos, priorities, it's given some hashtags. Just a quick way of narrowing some large volumes of data, especially this is really powerful when you've got more than this. Like we only had 15 here. If you had hundreds, it's a very quick way of affinity mapping and visualizing where the trends are. So there's another one. That was clustering by keywords. Let's try clustering by sentiments. I'll do the same thing I did before. Delete those empty ones. This time we're clustering by sentiment. And again, all I'm doing is bulk selecting them, pressing Miro AI. This time I'm clustering by sentiment. Okay, and it feels a bit big brotherish to be looking at whether something's a positive or a negative sentiment. But again, if you're using this as a tool to inspect and adapt, not to judge, but just to look at it and say, what does this tell us? How can we make sense of this? It can be quite useful. Very cool, right? Now, let's blow your mind even further, all right? So another way of affinity mapping, a little bit of a different way. I think actually this Miro AI cluster by keywords quite cool, but this is another way of visualizing it. So once more over here, well, I need your help with this one, folks. This one, we're going to be clustering by certain categories, and I've pre-loaded those categories to make it a bit easier. We are going to add tags to each of these post-its that we've previously created. That's where I need your help. Your tag options are, and for awareness, how to tag is to press a left click any post-its and then press the label or add tag button. It appears on your bar. Looks like a little price tag. If you press that, there are 6 options: process, people, and tools, and outside control, inside influence, and inside control. So just take a look and start tagging those. It doesn't matter if they're accurate tags at this point. We just need to ensure that every one of them are tagged. It's just a way of doing this in a second. To start adding some tags to these. Silos is related to process. Too many dependencies, again, process. Lots of these are probably going to be process related. Uncertainty, well, that could be many things. Doesn't matter too much at the moment. We're just using this as a quick exercise. Just add some tags. We need to make sure everyone's got at least one tag. Anything missing? Too many dependencies. Process, no decision making. Let's call it people. Has everything got a tag? Not the one at the top. Oh, that's the one I created, wasn't it? No one knows who makes a decision around here. Again, people. Okay, so what I'm going to use now is a tool called the clusterizer inside Miro. I'm going to bulk select these, and I'm going to press or type in clusterizer. It's just an add-on app. It's free. You press clusterizer, and then you build. And what it's going to do is it's going to create one of these network diagrams showing all of these linkages, assuming they're all tagged. Did this work? If it doesn't work, then Miro's done something funny. The lines have disappeared. All right. Oh no, I can kind of see them. I think they're just showing in the wrong color. Let me just make sure those are dark enough. There we go. They were showing the wrong color. So zooming in now, you can see very quickly we've got some affinity mapping that's been done based on those tags. We can see that many things relating to process were relating to this particular thing and this particular thing. Tribes of spaghetti lines of dependencies were also related to people. If you had chosen some particularly accurate tags, again, it's just a sense-making exercise. What does this data tell us? And then we can use that to narrow in on where the impediments are. What do we want to do as a consequence? Conscious of time, we should really look at some of the other options. So we've looked at the marginal gains gauntlets. There are experiment canvases that you can use to design your experiments. So let's say you've got your chosen impediment, you've prioritized it. Here are a few examples of how you can design something that looks to resolve it. So there's a more complex or a more detailed, not complex, more detailed version that goes into the detail of the, who the particular scientists are, what the problem we're trying to solve is, what outcome we're seeking, what our actual hypothesis is, which people are affected by this experiment, what results will we see if we believe it, if we prove the hypothesis true or false, how long we'll do the trials, how it's obviously very scientific based. And then there's also a lean experiment canvas that you can use, which looks at just the simple things like what's the problem, what's the outcome, what result will we see in 3 months' time, and what are our trials, what steps are we taking to bring this experiment to life. So again, I find it can be quite useful to co-create your experiments with the people that are impacted by it, so that you're helping people be part of the change, inviting them to be part of the change rather than inflicting upon them. There'll be far less resistance that way. Basically start with your impediments, work with the audience to identify what that experiment looks like, and then basically build in the feedback loops that enable you to reflect on how that experiment's going. So let's try and make it a bit more concrete then. We've got too many priorities. We've identified that as a systemic problem. We've exposed that, everyone's aware of it now, leadership know and otherwise. We've designed an experiment that looks to address too many priorities. We've said, hey, what we're going to do in this next 3 months, we're going to focus on that. The problem is this, the outcome we're hoping for is fewer priorities will mean there's going to be less work in progress and more stuff being done. And that's also probably going to result in happier people. So it's going to be a boost to team morale as well. So we're going to measure morale, we're going to measure the time it takes to get stuff done, how many things we're working in parallel. We're going to measure some of these things. These are the results we're looking for. And we're going to do this over 3 months. And then leadership knows about this. Everyone knows we're working on this. And then we just measure how that's going. We might check in periodically and see how it's going. Is our hypothesis being proven true or false? And then next time round, we can work out, do we need to amplify this experiment? Is it working? Is the data telling us it's going the right way, and therefore we need to continue doing that? Or do we need to dampen that and try something different as a consequence? So again, experiment canvas can be a great way to work towards resolving a particular impediment. There's also something I've got called the impediment cyclone. Bring your attention to here on the boards. Again, this looks to leverage the power of different networked individuals, people from different teams. You start with your impediment in the center, and then you work through each of these sections clockwise. So the top section is, or the first section you look at is relating to this impediment. What's one thing I wish I knew earlier about this impediment? And this can be quite powerful because, you know, people will probably have faced this impediment before you. They've learned some things that you didn't. That knowledge that you didn't have, that you wish you had, hopefully you're going to start gaining some of that now. The top right section is what one thing, or one way I've tackled this previously, and that doesn't have to be in this company, it could be in another company. And again, we're going to start to leverage the power of the wider hive mind, the wider brain. And then we're going to look at, hey, what ideas do I have? So an idea I have that might help us tackle this problem. That's the bottom right section. And again, we'll start to get lots of insights from lots of different people as to how we might address that. And then we go into a round of improv. If anyone's familiar with improv, you look to yes, and you build on the work of someone else. What you'll do in this round is you'll grab someone else's idea from the previous section and you'll try and build upon it. You'll say, okay, yes, this, and we'll do this as well. And from that, we're going to start to use, as I said, the collective hive minds to identify potential solutions to some of these problems that we have. So I'm conscious of time. It's time to reflect, just to wrap things up. And again, if there are any questions, do feel free to call out. 5 things I'd like you to remember about continuous improvement at scale. Firstly, start small. Those systemic impediments are large for a reason. Try and break them down into smaller pieces. So you might pilot a systemic intervention, one of these experiments with a few small teams first. You don't need to try and do it across the whole company, the whole department or otherwise. Start small. Think big, start small, learn fast, to quote John Smart from BVSSS, better value, sooner, safer, happier. And you can use the marginal gains gauntlets as a way of trying to find those smaller improvements from this big one to begin with. Fundamentally, everything is an experiment. So I've found that by introducing things as experiments, it's easier to get buy-in. It's easier to bring about meaningful change, and people are less resistant because they don't think, well, this new thing that's going to happen to us is set in stone. It's a command, but we're going to be working that way forever. So work with those people involved, and this comes into the next part, co-create those experiments with the people involved. Design your experiment, form your hypothesis, think about what will happen if the impediment's removed, identify how and when you'll seek to prove the hypothesis and the conditions that will tell you it'll be successful. You're all aware agility is about feedback loops. It's how I describe agility is. It's all a series of feedback loops, and continuous improvement is continuous. You don't need to wait to the next retrospective or the next scaled retro or the next town hall or whatever event that you're using to improve. Build in the feedback loops with those you work with to bring about change, and use the data that you capture from these experiments to amplify the good, dampen the bad, and of course, pivot where you need to. Obviously, retrospect at scale, not just locally, so that we are sharing those learnings, harnessing that knowledge I mentioned before as one of our most powerful resources. We're harnessing that scale, not just hoarding it to our local teams. And then coming back to the last point, making improvement a priority. Someone said earlier, and we were talking about this, I want to get to Hawaii, this company mission, we want to get to Hawaii. And it's amazing what can happen when everyone is aligned around a single priority. So if we make improvement a priority and it not just be a side of desk job that you kind of get around to when you can, then improvement will happen. So make it a priority. Continuous improvement is continuous. Build in capacity for it in the way the teams work, create goals around it. Perhaps you might find that you've got a really big systemic impediment that's affecting lots of teams. Maybe that becomes an OKR for the next quarter. How can we resolve this impediment? Or resolving this impediment becomes one of our goals. And by doing so, we're going to start to make continuous improvement part of your company's DNA, not just buzzwords and lip service. Any questions coming in? Shand, yes, these are all templates. I share They're all free, so you'll have access to these. Not all of them are templated and shareable, but I'll be making them templated and shareable. Are there any other questions before we go into the important feedback loop part of this this talk? Because it wouldn't be very proper for me to come and talk to you about continuous improvement without continuously improving this talk itself.
Chris, I
Yes.
have a question. So that's amazing, and thank you so much. That was really, really good. And I can think of all the retros that I have done with few teams attending, and well, it was never as good as this. But the question would be, would we just work between teams and I work with the engineering teams, or would I also invite people from other parts of the business? So maybe product, maybe management as well, because their views are going to be, or what they see is different than maybe what teams experience, and we don't want to lose that the side of that as well. So yeah, who would be invited to those events, and kind of like looking at the pain avalanche, for example, like who's to talk
as many people and as many representatives of different parts of the company as possible is my recommendation, because these scaled retrospectives, they're about painting the picture of your company, and you can only gain that if you are considering not just one part of the company, i.e. those delivering the work, but those that are part of it as well, part of the whole value chain. So yeah, I encourage representation from various different areas.
And how do you manage a massive group of people in a retrospective? Like, how do you make this happen so it actually brings value rather than a mess?
I guess good facilitation, good ground rules from the beginning, and I guess psychological safety. You know, building in that trust that what we're doing is we're doing it for a purpose, and that purpose is continuous improvement. It's nothing you share is to be held against you. Everyone's ideas are welcome. These are things we are doing for the benefit of you and for the company. It comes with a bit of practice too. So I just invite you for a moment, share some of your takeaways from this session, lock in that learning, add a thought on a post-it note. What's one takeaway from your perspective from this continuous improvement at scale section? And then when you've done that, grab one of these post-it notes and tell me, did I hit a high note? Was this talk a symphony, or was it a cacophony where it fell a bit flat? So we're going to use the musical stave scale to let me know how your feedback is, to gauge your return on time invested. If it was not a great use of your time, then these post-it notes should be towards the bottom of the scale, representing a low pitch. If it was a good use of your time, it should be towards the upper end of the scale, suggesting I hit a high note. And again, all feedback is welcome. It helps me to continuously improve how I deliver this particular talk. And yeah, the floor is open for any questions or any further questions. I'm also going to point you towards more resources of mine. So some of those key links. I have a website with 110, I think, various templates and canvases, all freely downloadable to be used in Miro, Mural, or otherwise. LinkedIn is where I share most of my stuff. I've got a YouTube channel, and as Sath mentioned earlier on, I've got a book coming out, but it's not quite ready yet, and it's all about continuous improvement. It's called the Retrospective Playbook, which features many of these things. In fact, this talk is based on a single chapter, the Continuous Improvement at Scale chapter of the book. Those energy levels have slipped, I fear. It's that time of day where everyone's thinking about a beer. It's nice weather outside. I'm going to hand it back to Sath and Donald, unless there are any further questions.
Chris, I've got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
It's Jim here. So first of all, thanks very much. That was really interesting. So yeah, I've got another question. It's quite specific, and it comes back to this same area that I was asking about before, about the wastes. Mm-hmm. But this is more overall. How do you find your teams and your audiences and your clients reacting to that term waste in the work that they do?
So obviously it's a stigmatized thing, right? It's a negative. They're not going to immediately think, oh, this is a good thing. We're talking about waste. It doesn't suggest things are rainbows and sunshine. But equally, it's an important term. It's important to recognize that we aren't as efficient as we could be. And again, you'll note from some of the ways that I have caveated many of these things, this is not about pointing out an individual team not being good enough. It's not for that purpose. It's about exposing the elephants in the room, using the collective wisdom of the hive mind and the data that they tell us to identify where we should focus. Because there's no, again, although there are multiple I's in continuous improvements, this is not an I thing. This is not a blame thing. This is about, hey, us against the problem. What are we going to do about that problem?
So do you get pushback on that term? And if you do you persist with it?
I don't get pushback, or if I do get pushback, sorry, the way I tend to phrase it is, hey, it's a word, right? Doesn't matter what word we're using here. All it means is that we have areas for improvements. And this is language from recognized, industry recognized books, Mary and Tom Poppendick. This is not something I've fabricated. It's not to be used for blame or otherwise. It's just a word that helps us identify as a snapshot in time where we can improve.
Okay, thanks very much. And I agree with your comment about everything's an experiment. When you can make things experiments, it really makes a big difference, I think.
Hugely. I've had so much less resistance to change when I've introduced things as an experiment. There's often resistance when someone thinks, oh, this new process is going to come in. I've got a great story about it, in fact. There was a company I was working with, a large FTSE 250 company. They had just acquired a smaller company. The smaller company were used to more lean processes, being a bit more renegade about how they deploy things into production. The larger company were FTSE 250. They had auditory requirements, and the change manager for that larger company that acquired the smaller company, he put in a new change management process. And the way he did it was he introduced this big document, and he said, right, from this date, folks, this is how we're doing it going forwards, and no changes will go into production unless anyone uses this new approach. 2 weeks later, maybe 5 changes have been submitted by the approach, and he's saying, why isn't it working? What's going on? There was no change management in that. There was no working with people to understand why it was being introduced. It was just, here's this document, folks, go and run with it. So very different story. Whereas the way I worked with him to bring about that change is I put in a workshop that explored why the change was being brought in, queried what people's concerns and challenges were around it, and said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to try this new process for this period of time. Here are the touch points we will use to reflect and adapt on whether it's working and what things aren't working and what things we can do differently. And as a result, people started using it because it was introduced as more of an experiment that they could interact with. They had the ability to shape rather than, here's a document, go and live by it now.
Thanks again.
No worries. Anything else from anyone?
I think you might be off the
hook,
Chris.
I think that's it.
Yeah,
off the hook.
We've usually got the hour and a half. That's the length of the session. That's the time box. But yep, I think you've admirably answered the questions, and you picked up some points as we went along. So I think that's fantastic. And as you mentioned, you're going to share the link to the mural, and most of these are templated, so people get some real practical use and value and can take these back into their day-to-day work. So yeah, I think that was excellent. Yeah, really good. Lots of practical stuff. Very creative, as I would always expect from you. And yeah, really good session all around. Lots of great points made. So thanks for joining us. Really good to see you again. Really good to host you, and I hope we might see you again at a future Award Scotland session. I'm sure we will. You've got a number of different great talks out there. So just to say thanks on behalf of myself and Donald and the rest of the team, and also to everyone who joined this evening for the contributions and for supporting Chris with his activities, and for just generally making it a fantastic session. I thoroughly enjoyed it and look forward to perusing the mural when I can actually practically do so So I'll definitely pick that up. So thanks, Chris. That was great. I think we'll wrap up a little bit earlier than usual tonight, folks. As I say, thanks again for your participation and joining us. We'll get the recording out later in the week for those who missed it. And just the usual couple of shout outs, really. So I think Donald posted it in the chat. We mentioned it in the previous couple of sessions, just around the Scotland Hub, which is an extension of the Agile 2023 happening in Orlando. I believe you're speaking there, Chris.
I am indeed.
Orlando, fantastic, great stuff. I'll be in Edinburgh, and Donald and I are supporting the volunteering team. So I think that's fantastic. So if you're able to join us, do sign up, do get involved. It's a fantastic opportunity, great thing for Scotland to be supporting the wider Global Agile Alliance family of events. I'll be in Amsterdam next week for XP and speaking there, so really looking forward to that. And we've got a whole bunch of other events that you'll see in the meetup, so do please check those out. I believe the next one's with our good friend Thor. It's going to be a fantastic session. He wrote the book on being Beyond Ego, which is absolutely fantastic, brilliant read, very applicable to a lot of my own work. So check that one out. And as Donald and I often say, if you do have some other thoughts and ideas for sessions you might like us to bring to the community, people you might like to see speak here, you're always welcome to reach out and give us a shout. And with that, I'd like to thank you again for attending and wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you happen to be. And we'll hope we'll see you again soon. Thanks again, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.